Twisted Metal is a video game about a car combat tournament run by a man named Calypso, who has the power to grant wishes. The winner of this tournament gets whatever they want, and a prize like that attracts the most savage killers around. Throughout the games, we meet many characters, good and bad, ready to fight to the death for what they want. Each character in a way projecting their personality onto their customized vehicle of destruction. The series is filled with standout characters and especially car designs. If we're sticking to the entries that most agree are the classics, Twisted Metal 1, 2, and Black, the iconic characters that come to mind are of course Sweet Tooth the ice cream truck, driven by psycho killer Needles Kane, Thumper, a lowrider with a flamethrower, driven by Bruce Cochran, Yellow Jacket, a taxi cab driven by Charlie Kane, Twister, a race car with a tornado ability, driven by Amanda Watts, Hammerhead, a monster truck with crushing power, driven by a pair of goofballs, Darkside, a trailerless semi-truck driven by the mysterious Mr. Ash, but more famously by Dollface in Twisted Metal Black, Mr. Grimm, a motorcycle driven by the Grim Reaper, Axel, a man imprisoned by his father in a giant two-wheeled contraption capable of firing a shockwave, Shadow, a hearse driven by an undead soulkeeper named Mortimer and later driven by Raven, a teenage goth girl in Twisted Metal Black, Brimstone, a coupe utility vehicle that launches a suicide bomber at other cars driven by a crazy preacher, Minion, a giant tank driven by the devil himself. The list goes on. There's a lot of cool and creative material to draw from if you wanted to make a Twisted Metal show or movie. The characters are messed up people with tragic pasts, and there's an element of the supernatural with all the wish granting and several undead or spirit-like drivers. It's a fun world, and going into the Peacock original series Twisted Metal starring Anthony Mackie, as a Twisted Metal fan myself from back in the 90s, the very minimum I expected was to see some of my favorite cars, some of the most memorable characters, and enjoy some action. And here I am, not just disappointed, but borderline furious. It's unbelievable how badly they screwed this up. I try to do my best to separate my feelings from games or movies or shows that I think are bad. I try not to take it personally. But I get upset when I feel like the people who are making something apparently for me are actively disrespecting both me and the property they're adapting. I'm fucking shocked. I had no idea it could be this bad. Twisted Metal has basically been a dead franchise for over 20 years, and while there's news about a possible new game being developed eventually, I don't think anyone was clamoring for a TV show. We already had a decent car combat movie, it's called Death Race. We didn't ask for this, yet they gave it to us anyway. I was happy to let this series stay dead, as a wonderful childhood memory on the early PlayStation consoles. But they came along and tickled my nostalgia bone and got me thinking, yeah, maybe. I mean, I guess it could be cool to see my favorite cars and characters come to life in a TV series. I won't get my hopes up. After the Resident Evil Netflix series, a Twisted Metal show on streaming service Peacock probably isn't going to be great. But yeah, as long as they deliver on the goods, it could be entertaining. And ladies and gentlemen, not only is Twisted Metal a mediocre television program that might at best mildly entertain a casual audience, but as a Twisted Metal show, it is an absolute failure and a downright embarrassment. I'm not going to review the entire series episode by episode. I'll leave that to Elvis the Alien, who handles that format far better than I could. No, we're mostly going to talk about the one thing they actually had to get right, but got wrong on such a level that it's baffling. The cars. There are no cars. There's no car combat in a Twisted Metal show. Even my dad knows that Twisted Metal is about cars blowing each other up, and they couldn't even get that right. These are the only cars seen in the show: Roadkill, Twister, Shadow, Outlaw, and Sweet Tooth. That's it. I shouldn't even count Shadow because it doesn't do anything. I'm definitely not counting Flower Power because the car is just shown once sitting there, and I'm not counting a group of trailer-equipped semi-trucks as a Darkside appearance, nor am I counting the lone black trailer-equipped semi-truck in the final episode as a Darkside appearance, because it doesn't do anything other than blow up. There's no Axel, there's no Warthog, no Spectre, no Minion, no Mr. Grimm. No Mr. Grimm, the motorcycle that appears in almost every game. How hard is it to put a guy in a black helmet on a motorcycle? 3 cars are introduced in the first episode. Roadkill appears at the end of episode 9 and Twister in episode 10. That means for 90% of the entire show, only 3 cars from Twisted Metal are present. And present is not even the right word, because Shadow just appears in the background a couple times after episode 1. You see Outlaw in action twice, and Sweet Tooth only fights once in episode 2. The majority of the show features no cars from the game at all. From the end of the intro of episode 2 all the way through episode 9, there's one brief car chase with Outlaw. Nothing else. No other cars, no car action for 7.5 episodes. The rest of the show is character drama, cringy comedy, and fight scenes. It isn't until the final episode that we get 6 minutes of Twisted Metal style action, which isn't very exciting. Shadow just blows up after doing nothing, and there's a real lack of special abilities. Roadkill has a wedge ability that's cool, practical for the real world, but we don't see Shadow ever using grounded detonating explosives that go under cars. We don't see Twister ever do anything akin to her tornado attack, which in this show could have been some kind of spinning evasive maneuver or a fancy way to do a quick 180. A lot of the stuff that made the cars in Twisted Metal fun is absent, though it was nice to see some swirly missiles from Sweet Tooth. All the effort towards the action in this show went into the hand-to-hand combat. Admittedly, some well-done scenes of fighting and graphic violence that certainly deliver on the gore you'd expect from a Twisted Metal show. But there's no car combat. And possibly just as big of an issue is the way video game characters are handled, in a range from decent to offensively terrible. The strongest character is Agent Stone. He's very close to his Twisted Metal Black counterpart. The driver of Outlaw, a cop that struggles with rage issues, who accidentally killed innocent people. In the game, it was part of a SWAT team raid. In the show, he's a mall cop that tries to establish order in his town when the apocalypse starts, and he shoots some people stealing food and accidentally shoots a little girl. That's a solid adaptation of the character for different circumstances, and it gives us an interesting man who was reluctant to step up, but ultimately took control and tries to keep law and order in the world, albeit through some pretty sadistic means. Next is John Doe, the driver of Roadkill, and he's only connected to John Doe from Twisted Metal Black in that they both have amnesia. Other than that, it's a completely new character. Bloody Mary briefly appears as the former love interest of John, and while she does have issues with obsessiveness, she's certainly not the Bloody Mary of the game who stabbed her friend at her friend's wedding out of jealousy, went to a mental institution, and now drives around in a wedding dress. Certainly not what we have here. Preacher, a very dark character that killed everyone in his church when he believed himself to be possessed by a demon during a psychotic break he had during a baptism, is now goofy cult leader, in charge of the holy men from Twisted Metal 2013. Isn't this how you always wanted to see Preacher represented on screen?
The Rocky Mountain Fuck Fest! What gifts did you motherfuckers bring me? What a hot piece of ass! I should lube up with oil and dick your muffler. Woo! You ever drink your own blood? It's intoxicating. What the f- If anybody's gonna fuck this car, it's gonna be me.
Amanda, the driver of Twister, appears as a traveling scavenger in a fleet of semi-trucks. A far cry from the young blonde with a lifelong obsession with fast cars. Actually, that's not Amanda Watts, that's Miranda Watts from Twisted Metal Head On. Get your facts straight, and try using more than the piss. Miranda Watts is Amanda's twin sister. They look identical and they were both professional racers. They're the same person. Pizza Boy appears as a background character, no one cares, but he does get one of the better joke moments when John is trying to punch him and his coat is so thick he can't hurt him. It got a laugh out of me. Amber Rose, the driver of Flower Power, which is never actually used, is someone who actually uses flowers to drug people. Whatever, who cares about this character anyway, she's from Twisted Metal 3. Calypso appears only as a voice on a radio in one episode, Sweet Tooth is mostly a disaster of a character given way too much screen time, destroying anything creepy or mysterious about him, as he's now desperate for audience approval, kidnapping people so he can perform stage plays for them. He has some entertaining moments, sometimes it works, but he gets way too much time to talk and is too often trying to make us laugh and failing. He never should have been a main character. And then there's Mr. Slam, my personal favorite car of the Twisted Metal franchise. A very recognizable car, seen on the cover of Twisted Metal 2, driven by disgruntled architect Simon Whittlebone. I sat there impatiently as episode after episode went by, showing no cars. I kept thinking, man, if I could just get one scene with Mr. Slam, I'll be happy. So our main characters, John Doe and Quiet, walk into a bar and encounter Bloody Mary. Everyone's drinking, having a good time, and we find out that this big old bartender goes by the name Mr. Slam. He's clearly not Simon from the game, but he's Mr. Slam apparently. Why? Not because he drives a combat tractor, it's because he can crush anything with his massive penis.
They call me Mr. Slam.
Why?
Because I can crush anything with my massive penis.
Which he does later in the episode when he crushes a watermelon with it. It was at this point when I started to feel personally insulted. Like the creators of the show were making fun of me for being a fan of the cars and characters of Twisted Metal. I started to get upset. That's what happens when a TV show takes your favorite car from Twisted Metal as a kid and turns it into a dick joke. I could stop here. If you're a Twisted Metal fan, this should be all you need to know. It's made with absolutely no respect for the fans of the game, and you should avoid it at all costs simply because of that. I don't just want a show full of fan service, I really don't. If this show had all the car action I wanted, but the acting sucked and the drama and humor sucked, I still wouldn't say it was good, but at least there would be something to enjoy as a fan of the franchise. So, oh god, not you again. So basically you want 10 episodes of non-stop cars exploding and no story. That would be stupid and boring. Oh, that's not what I said. Why do I keep doing this? This channel's gonna put me in the hospital someday, I know it. I want story, I want character development and drama and humor. They're all important parts of telling the story. There are actually some really good performances, sometimes too good for the quality of this show. When Fake Twister cries over Granny Dread's death, she's so convincing it's actually off-putting. She's too good for this show, you shouldn't be trying for an Emmy here. The creators and actors, some of them, are clearly trying to elevate the material and make an impact with the characters, and that's great. But the trailer for this show is stuffed with action scenes because that's the main draw for a Twisted Metal show. Car action isn't the only important thing, but it certainly is extremely important. That's what we're here for. The first episode is clearly where they spent all their budget, because the show opens strong with a car chase, car-mounted machine guns and rocket launchers, skillfully driving through a dead mall. We get some VFX shots of New San Francisco, which is run by Raven, who is not the Raven that was the driver of Shadow in Twisted Metal Black. Okay. We get a mid-episode chase of two people running from the cops driving Shadow, and they're running away from Outlaw. By the end of the episode, we see the arrival of Sweet Tooth, and it ends on a cliffhanger. Honestly, the first episode had me interested. There were 2 car action scenes. The exaggerated comic book style sets gave the show an interesting visual identity, like this goofy green liquid being used to sterilize John when he enters the city, and there was just enough over-the-top humor to make me smile a bit. I wish it had been a more serious show since the characters are based on Twisted Metal Black, but there's aspects to the show's tone that really worked for me. I honestly didn't mind the change in plot to be transporting something across the country instead of a fight-to-the-death tournament. A tournament sounds more like a story for a 2-hour movie, not a 10-episode show. So fine, whatever, change the plot. As long as there's a bunch of car combat on the way, oh wait, there isn't. I started getting my hopes up in episode 1, and then it all goes to hell immediately after the opening scene in episode 2. The beginning of episode 2 continues the confrontation with Sweet Tooth, and it's a fun little chase using car-mounted guns. It's what you want to see. And then almost the entire episode is Sweet Tooth trying to entertain the two main characters as they're held prisoner, and it's so bad. Episode 2 starts a really bad trend of episodes taking place in just 3 or 4 rooms. Obviously done to keep the cost down since they need all their money for the 2 action scenes at the beginning and end of the show. Episode after episode, the show feels like a low-budget production because they just don't go anywhere or do anything. There's some cool violence here and there, it's appreciated, and I'm not saying that everything that happens in the show is bad, but the scope of the show becomes so obviously limited by their budget. They drive all the way across the country, and I feel like we didn't even leave one place. They go from San Francisco to Chicago and back in 10 episodes, and the only places we see are a random bar, a restaurant, a security facility, a movie theater, an empty casino in Vegas, a neighborhood in Topeka, Kansas, and a parking lot. 2 parking lots. The rest of the show takes place outside. What was the budget for this show? $5? For a franchise known for taking us to interesting and famous places around the world, it's amazing to me that a cross-country trip could be so boring. There's some good character stuff. The episode where John and Quiet are stuck in the restaurant is probably the best episode of the show, because they can just calmly interact with each other and share and connect without all the distractions and chaos. It's nice. It would be a great character-focused episode in a series that actually had good action in other episodes, but that's not what this is. The look into how people who harvest food for the cities are given opportunities to work as servants in exchange for freedom, but are then treated like slaves and have body parts cut off for disobeying, that's some hardcore shit and establishes a very cruel world. And some of the humor, some of it, lands really well. I got a serious laugh out of these cannibals soaking people in teriyaki sauce. The chef getting scolded because he was only supposed to soak one in teriyaki sauce, so he dumps lemon pepper seasoning on him to change the flavor. Then he says this.
I call dibs on the man titties.
I laughed a lot at this part, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, where most of the humor fails is in Sweet Tooth and John Doe. Sweet Tooth is just too much. He works really well in shorter moments like the intro to episode 5. I honestly believe the first time we see him should have been the part where he drives up to the entrance. It's a much more menacing presentation of the character. But the main character, John Doe, I think is an issue of miscasting. Anthony Mackie is an actor I like, but not for this role. He's too clean and good looking for someone who's been living for 20 years on the outside dealing with savages. I mean, sure, they do establish that some people dress up and care about their appearance, but this loner type driving around thinking about his family and his forgotten life, I want to see someone a bit more grizzled and serious. I'd love to see Ving Rhames in this role. Cut out most of the jokes, just leave the quick subtle ones, and Ving Rhames would absolutely kill it. Okay, I don't want to talk about Twisted Metal anymore. The end of the show has the nerve to tease a second season, where they actually will have Calypso's tournament. They show pictures of a bunch more characters from the game, and at this point, fuck off. Get out of here. No one wants to see a season 2 with an even lower budget. Oh, and we meet Dollface at the end, who is definitely not Dollface, because Dollface had a mask nailed to her face by her crazy boss after spilling coffee on some documents. And this Dollface is apparently John Doe's long-lost sister and is obviously just wearing a detachable mask, not nailed to her face. So does anyone really want to see more of this? I certainly don't. Hopefully it crashes and burns. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe. I'm out of here.